this video, we're going to be reviewing the Winchester Model 1894, or what's commonly referred to as the Winchester 94. We're going to be going through the history, some of the features, as well as some of the changes with the Winchester over time. The Winchester 1894 was first developed by John Browning in 1894. It was the first commercial repeating rifle that used smokeless powder. And as a result of the over 120 years since production, the Winchester 94 has become an iconic American firearm, with over 7.5 million built to date, which makes it one of the most, if not the most popular hunting rifle ever built, primarily for small to medium-sized game, including deer hunting in the United States. The Winchester 94 was offered in many different calibers and loads, the most popular of which you see on the table today is the venerable 30-30 cartridge, or what you're going to see in some of the older versions of the Winchesters, what they refer to as the 30 WCF, or the 30 Winchester center-fired cartridge. So looking at the history of the 1894, a lot of people will run across these, being 7.5 million have been built to date, but there's been some changes over the years with the 1894. So what we're going to first off do is go through a little bit of the history of the 1894 so you can know which type of 1894 that you have in your possession, or if you're willing to buy one, which ones you're actually looking at. So the first change that happened since the first productions of the 1894 happened in 1964. That's when the Olin Corporation, that was a chemical corporation, owned Winchester. However, one of the challenges they had with the Winchester 94s was because of the manual labor and the parts involved, they were not making profitable rifles at the time. So in order to maximize profits, they changed their production processes. They used what was called sintered steel in their receivers. They used hollow roll pins and stamped steel lifters and poor quality wood. So overall, all of the quality that you had seen in the Winchesters up till 1964 were higher quality than those that followed them in 1964 on, with the changes made by Olin Corporation. That is why you're going to see a lot of people look for the pre-64s, which we'll talk about in a moment. Following additional changes over the life cycle of the 1894 was the next major changes came in 92. In 92, they changed the top ejection angle on the rifles. So in most cases, prior to the 1960 or 1982 changes, all the ejections happened straight out of the top of the receiver, which of course caused problems for people who wanted to run a scope on the rifle. As a result of that, with the change in 1982, the ejections were then angled so that people could actually fire and mount sights off the 1894 platform. To work around this, a lot of people, instead of using the standard, semi-buckhorn sights, would also add what were called peep sights to the rear of the rifle itself. But that was one of the major changes that happened in 82, and it largely happened in response to one of the biggest competitors, which is the Marlin 336, that had a side ejection port, which was inherently made to support scoping the 30-30 rifle. Following additional changes in 1992, FN bought Winchester out of bankruptcy and then started changing their processes to modern CNC machine parts, which are generally better quality. But what they also did at the same time is they added what was called a crossbolt safety into the receiver. Now, to give you an example of a crossbolt safety, in the Marlin 336 I have a crossbolt safety right here, so when the trigger is half cocked, I can put the safety on or off the rifle. The reason why I don't have an example to show you in the Winchester models is I won't buy a Winchester 94 that has a crossbolt safety. It's ridiculous. The fact that they even put it on there offended a lot of the people that really liked the Winchester 94s. The Marlin 336 didn't bother me as much. I didn't care at the time. Of course, I was a kid at the same time. It's my first hunting rifle. What did I know? But now that I have more in the collection, one of the biggest changes they made, in addition to the CNC improvements, was putting that crossbolt safety. And they did this largely for international sales, because FN was an international sales organization, gun producer, and thought that would help, which in the end ended up offending a lot of traditional Winchester owners. Beyond that, in 2003, to respond to the crossbolt safety, they then decided to move the safety to the tang, and the tang is right here on the rifle, so that you can see this a lot, for example, on bolt action rifles. A lot of Brownings and others will have that. So they did make improvements by moving that off onto the tang, but again, many traditionalists still question, why exactly do you need to have a manual safety on an action of an 1894, and I'm one of them as well. Next changes happened in 2006 when the last New Haven Winchesters were produced. That's when the factory was ultimately shut down. Production restarted when the Japanese Muruku Corporation started reproducing these in Japan in 2010. Now that you know the history and succession of the changes that have happened with 1894, one of the things that make people want to buy the pre-1964s is a number of different reasons. First off, the receiver and all of the small parts were solid steel billet. That's where they came out of, which means it was high quality. When you look at, for example, my gun on the table here, I have 3 of them. I have one gun that was produced in 1948. This is a pre-64 and arguably one of my favorite collectible firearms that I have. Moving up, I have a 1979 production as well as a 1969 production Golden Spike Commemorative. But of these 3 on the table here, the one I love the most and the ones that are sought after more so are the pre-64s because of the quality. There was better fit, better finish in the manual labor, and as a result these are highly sought after and they do command better prices. Now a lot of people wonder, is my 1894 a pre-64 or not? Or if you're looking at buying one, how do you know? And there's an easy way to do that. In each 1894 produced, your serial number is written at the lower part of the receiver right here. And what you want to do is look at the number and match it up. In the comments section, I actually include a link to determine exactly which year your rifle was produced. But a very easy rule of thumb is the following. Any rifle produced that has a serial number lower than 2,700,000 is a pre-64 model. So in this case, for example, when I looked at the serial number of my rifle, I matched it to the production of 1949. And this one, of course, was in excellent condition when I bought it, which is one of the reasons why I love it. But all you have to do when you look now, if whether you have a 94 in your own possession, maybe your father, your grandfather had one, or you're at a gun store or a gun show, take a look at the lower end of the receiver and simply look for serial numbers that are lower than 2,700,000. Because if they are lower than that number, they are desirable, and these are the best ones that people typically go after the most within the marketplace. Now, after the changes in 1964 that Olin had made, there were improvements later into the 70s. Now this model is a 1979 model, and this is very different in many respects than a lot of the ones that I see coming out in the late 60s. In the case with the late 70s, what I've seen is the wood is actually improved, as well as the lift gates are actually improved as well, instead of using their standard stamped steel. So there were some marginal improvements made over time by Olin Corporation in the late 70s from the rifles that I've seen, but I still, the ones I look for the most and the ones that I want to have possession of are the pre-64s. Now, looking at the rifle in general, what do you know about the 1894? Well, first thing is it's a highly effective rifle at 100 to 200 yards. And a lot of this has to do with the caliber that it was loaded within, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's also great for shooting through brush and heavy, thick areas. It also uses, the 20 models utilize a 6-round magazine, tubular magazine. And of course, they're high quality. And they called these repeating rifles because at the time you could pull off shots very quickly with the lever action of the rifle itself. Now, what are some of the drawbacks? Well, as we previously discussed, there were various quality releases after 1964. So if you're looking to get a Winchester 94, make sure that you're conscious or cognizant of the serial numbers and what you're buying relative to the quality and what you're expecting out of them. There's also a limited effective range with the 30-30 round. Now the 30-30 round is this round right here. And one of the things you're going to notice about the round that was developed and used within these rifles is that it has a flat nose, soft point. That allows you to stack into the tube up to 6 rounds from point to point, but you're going to eliminate the fear of what's called chain fire. And chain fire is when you have a tube full of these rounds and potentially have a pointed round, as you see here on this 308 round, going into the primer that would ultimately set off potentially all of the 6 rounds in your tubular magazine, which you don't want to have happen. It's very dangerous. So what they did as a result of that was they eliminated the hard point and made a soft lead nose point so they could be loaded in here from end to end. However, one of the drawbacks with the 30-30 cartridges, even though it's very effective at short range, it tends to drop like a rock past about 200 plus yards. So that's why many times when people use the 30-30 and the Winchester 94s, they realize that this is a great deer hunting cartridge, but it's limited to usually about 100 to 200 yards. And then at that point, this round, which is aerodynamically inferior to, for example, a hard-pointed round here, will drop in many respects like a rock at that point. The other drawback with the 1894s, as we talked about before, prior to the 1982 angle ejection models, it was not really designed for a scope. So you couldn't really put a scope mount on here as effectively as you could, for example, on a Marlin 336. So those are some of the drawbacks as well. As we talked about earlier, the most popular models out are 30-30. If you see, again, a 30 WCF written on the older models, it is a 30-30. It's just another way that Winchester put it onto their rifles. It does hold 6 rounds. And one of the neat things that happened not too long ago was in response to these 7.5 million 94s that were in circulation, Hornady came out with an interesting new round for the 30 called the Lever Evolution. And what the Lever Evolution did is it reintroduced a point onto the 30-30 round, but what they did in addition to that is they made it a flex tip. And the flex tip, or polymer if you will, is safe then to load in chambers like this from back to back on the rounds itself, because ultimately because it's a soft tip, it's not going to cause a chain fire effect into the 30-30. What it also did on average is it increased the foot-pounds per square inch by about 250. So in effect, the Lever Evolution round extended the range of a 30-30 from about 200 yards to about 250 to 300 yards, depending upon who's firing the rifle. And that, of course, made the 30-30 a more practical rifle for medium to longer range shooting for people that actually own these or had these in possession. So that was one of the changes we saw recently with this as well. The only drawback to the Lever Evolution is they don't recommend that you keep these loaded in the chambers for long periods of time, because it can distort the actual nose and then ultimately in the end the accuracy and performance of this round. So for example, if this is going to be a truck gun for you or somewhere you're going to store it loaded in the tubular magazine for long periods of time, you're better off using the flat nose power points, for example, that I have here, as opposed to keeping it loaded with the Lever Evolutions for long periods of time because of the distortions that will form onto the top of the bullet. However, if you're going out for limited deer hunting rounds or hunting activities where you're only loading it for those periods of time, this is a perfectly good cartridge to use. And again, it gives you a great deal of added performance from the 30-30 that we didn't have up until recently. Now, as far as actions and operation, again, it's a lever action. It's quick operating and loading. As most people are familiar with lever actions, the drop gate model, and then of course you can load through the side gates. Very effective for fast loading and reloading. Ergonomics and weight, it comes in about 6.5 pounds. It's also very compact from a horizontally portable position, meaning it doesn't have drop magazines and things like that make it hard to, for example, put into a scabbard or small, longer areas that ultimately a lever action can fit into, which makes them very handy and very portable to operate. Some of the options you would see prior to the 1892 changes, where you had the angle ejection and scope mounts, is a lot of people would add on what were called peep sights onto the rifle to improve any accuracy they weren't getting out of, for example, the semi-buckhorn sights that I have on here today. That was one of the major changes, and of course after the 1982 angle ejections, then you're going to see some of the versions will now have scope mounts on them as well. As far as accuracy, it's very good. Again, out to 100 to 200 yards. There are alternatives, however, that have come onto the market. Savage and Henry make some different versions. And of course, as I alluded to earlier, the most popular competitor is the Marlin 336, because not only is it a side ejection model, but it also, because of that, handles scopes. And you can find these in a lot of different places that you would commonly shop for firearms, such as Walmart and other places like that, commonly carry the 336. This is the one I grew up with. This was my first big game hunting rifle, and it had taken many deer for me over the years. In fact, because it had a scope on it, I was able to drop mule deer well out past 200 yards because, again, I had my windage adjustments onto the rifle that I knew where the holds would be. But again, it didn't change the fact that the 30-30 rifle is the most effective within a 200-yard range. Now, as far as utility, what are these rifles great for? Well, as we talked about earlier, for medium game hunting, many would argue that no rifle has taken more deer in the United States for the past 100 plus years than the Winchester 94, so it's excellent for medium game hunting. Younger shooters, it's a great rifle as well. It's not very hard to handle, learn how to shoot. And then there's also the personal defense side as well. A lot of people overlook the value of a 30-30 as a personal defense rifle, how effective it actually is for you in that regard. So overall, this is not the gun that won the West, just for those that sometimes get confused about that. That was the Winchester 1873. But this rifle did win the hearts of American hunters for over the past 120 years, which is why we're doing the review on it now. It is an iconic American rifle. It is highly versatile. It is a great value, and if you have a chance to pick up one of these, especially the pre-64s, which have a serial number under 2,700,000, just like I did with this model here, you're going to love these rifles. It is part of American history, and this is your opportunity to own one of them as well. And now you know the differences when you see the 1894 as to what happened, how did these evolve, and then ultimately what are the most coveted ones to own today. If you like this video or like our channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.